Plan when you can. I'm Gary Anderson, financial advisor, Anderson Advisors.
And I'm Kevin Tharp, elder law and estate planning attorney.
Kevin, I know you've told me this, and I've seen it as well. Over the past few months, it seems like we run across people who are having more crisis than normal. You get a phone call, something's going on with the family or some individuals, and they want to address that. And so I know both you and I do planning. That's the main thing that we do. You on the legal side, me on the financial side, and we always have some good ideas about planning, and we want to make sure people understand that today. Timing is really sensitive when it comes to planning. So give us some ideas, Kevin, of what you think a plan should look like and when it should happen.
Gary, I know that on a regular basis we get at least 1 to 2 calls a week. Sometimes it's from people who are prospective clients that are reaching out to us, that were referred to us because they're going through a crisis. Many times it's clients that we've helped over the years that are facing a crisis. And Gary, typically the two situations that we see on a consistent basis is we get a call because somebody's passed away. One of our clients have lost a spouse, or the kids of some clients that we've done work for, their parents have passed away. The other is we get calls from people who are getting sick, not necessarily sick from COVID, although that can trigger some other things, but extended illnesses. We get a call on a regular basis. My neighbor across the street called not long ago because his mom fell and broke her hip. It goes from the hospital to a rehab to a nursing home, and that transition can happen very quickly. I know personally all of that happened very quickly with my mother. Mm-hmm. It's usually involving a fall. We see this a lot with people who are falling. Their parents and loved ones are falling, and that fall when you're in your 80s or 90s has a much more severe consequence than if you're in your 30s or 40s or even 50s. But you're seeing even then people in their 50s who are falling, and these things, tragically, things change very quickly with the snap of a finger. Mm-hmm. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of people, unfortunately, when that crisis happens, are not prepared. And some of them think they are prepared. Some of them think they've taken the steps that they need to take to deal with the loss of a loved one, but legally they're really not prepared. And that's because you can plan when you can by looking at a couple of very important legal principles. And the first thing is you can look to title. You can be prepared if there is a crisis by looking to how your assets are titled. And why do you look there first? Because that is the number one thing that will determine what happens to your assets when you die, is look to title, because that's going to dictate what happens. And when I talk about title, you've heard me say this on the show before, but I think it really is worth repeating because it takes a while to sink in, because this is something that is different. It's been around for centuries, but when it comes to planning, especially estate planning, typically the focus is not first on title. The focus is on something else. It's on document. So the look first to title, that's why I say look first to title, because that is the most important thing. That's the engine that drives everything, is how assets are titled. And when I refer to titling of assets, Gary, what I'm talking about is, first of all, how is it owned? For example, your home. Just look to the deed that you have. Is it just in Kevin's name, or is it just in Missy's name? That's what we call sole title. If I pass away with my home just in my name alone, then there are extra steps that my family's going to have to take. We know what's going to happen next, or my family will, when I pass away, if it's just in my name alone. There's another form of titling called joint ownership, very common with married couples. Maybe it's the home they own together, joint. Maybe it's a bank account or a financial account. That's a very common form of titling. So when somebody passes away, you look to how things are titled, and if it's joint, that's going to tell you what steps you need to take next. Yet I am I'm not surprised, actually, when people call in a crisis. The first place they look to is, well, we got a will fact, we just had it updated. They look to document. This conversation about title is rarely had when you talk to an attorney, an estate planning attorney even, of this subject of what's going to happen when there's a crisis like I lose a loved one.
Kevin, that's something that I think a lot of people overlook at times. The fact that they think, that's a good point you made there. And you're listening to Truth in Planning on News Talk AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN. Kevin, that's something I think people really do overlook. They think the worst thing that can happen is for someone to think they have a plan because they put these things together over the years. They have a document, and they really don't. And that's worse than having no plan at all at times, because you think you got something that's going to respond with all these particular situations. Only do you find out in the middle of a crisis that you don't have a plan that works.
And as a society, we can get so much information now instantaneously from the internet. And there's so many different resources where we can get further information. Facebook, and go to webinars and radio ads and radio shows like this one. And what I found consistently is I try to listen to all of them and read all of them just to kind of keep up of what's going on. And probably the number one thing in the dissemination of information out there when this topic of estate planning comes up is the topic focuses, they look to document. Mm-hmm. And people, I think, are getting a false sense of security that they have everything they need. They're prepared for a crisis because they have the document. And document is important, but the first thing you need to look to is title. How are your assets titled? And then the second thing, another form of titling, Gary, we see all the time, particularly in the financial industry with financial products, is beneficiary designation. Things like our retirement accounts, life insurance policies, now many brokerage accounts let you designate a beneficiary. Annuities let you designate a beneficiary. So you name a beneficiary. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a child or a grandchild or some other family member. That's a form of titling that's going to dictate what happens in a crisis, that crisis being you lose a loved one. And so I always say, first and foremost, look to title when there is a crisis. You have a plan if you look to title first. And that's what we do for our clients. That's what I believe separates us and makes us different at my law office, is that we first sit down and look at title when we're talking about a person's plan.
And Kevin, I know you've told me at times that you're not really concerned so much about how much somebody has, what they have, anything else. Again, it's how it's titled. And I think that's an important thing, is that the amount of land, the amount of real estate, the amount of money someone has, according to what you've told me in the past, makes no difference whatsoever.
Value does not make any difference in a crisis, because title is what dictates what's going to happen, especially when that crisis is you've just lost a loved one, or you're planning for that inevitable situation that could happen. It's devastating to lose a loved one. I hope that when I go, that it is, I leave an impact. There's a hole there that is left. And so we prepare for that, and you can prepare for that by looking towards title. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about the other essential element that's required, and you can plan for this before a crisis.
Well, and I think opportunity is important, Kevin, and people, our listeners, have an opportunity, and I know people were concerned about this. You start thinking about these things when you hear someone talking about it. They have an opportunity to come talk to you, and you don't charge for that. And I think that's an important thing, because they're going to get valuable information. So why don't you give them your information and let them know how to get in touch with you?
Gary, there's 2 points of contact, 2 ways to reach me. Number one is my phone number, 866-253-6994. And the other way is through my website, kevintharp.com. In fact, I had a client gave me a suggestion the other day, said, you may not remember the number, but remember the name. KevinTharp.com is my website.
You're listening to Truth in Planning on North Georgia's News Talk AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.